Hello, so we're going to hear from Frederick Leslie Thorpe today, who's a former post office investigator and held various roles in the post office over the course of about a 40-year career, and was involved in both the McKelvey and McLaughlin cases against sub-postmasters that we heard about last week from the respective investigators Suzanne Winters in the case of Northern Ireland and Raymond Grant in terms of Scotland. Those videos are available on the channel in earlier updates last week. So in addition to the usual, a couple of minor corrections and affirming that his statement is correct, which is of a reasonable length, shall we say, compared to some of the shorter ones we've seen. It's really interesting, I think, the background of this specific investigator, because he did actually used to be a sub-postmaster himself. So let's jump into the inquiry where he sets out his background.
Good morning, sir. Can you see and hear us?
Yes, I can. Thank you very much.
May we please call Mr. Thorpe?
Yeah.
Repeat after me. I do solemnly,
I do solemnly,
sincerely and truly
declare and affirm
that the evidence I shall give
shall
be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
Could you please confirm your full name, Mr. Thorpe?
Frederick Leslie Thorpe.
So we've got Frederick Thorpe here, who is a former post office investigator. We saw quite a few investigators last week, and we have done over the course of the inquiry. Hopefully, we will be able to shed some light on some of the cases involved. It's Megan Miller today, who's counsel to the inquiry, who will be asking the questions.
Thank you very much for coming to the inquiry to give evidence and for the provision of your witness statement. You should have that witness statement in front of you. It's dated the 22nd of December 2023.
Yes.
And if you turn to the last page of that, which is page 14, is that your signature?
It is, yes.
So they're doing the usual preliminaries so they can ask them about what's in the witness statement. They can't just say, oh, actually, this isn't my statement, or that's not my signature. 14 pages, certainly not the smallest we've seen at 2 and a bit pages, but doesn't seem very long. We'll see what it contains then, shall we?
And I understand that you have a couple of corrections you'd like to make before we proceed.
Yes, the first correction is that when I made the statement, I hadn't had sight, or I wrote in the statement that I hadn't had sight of Mrs. McKelvey's tape transcript. I've since had sight of that, so that if that could be altered.
So Frederick Thorpe, I'm trying to think, was he the other person or one of the other people involved in the Maureen McKelvey case by the sounds of it, which we heard of from the other day from the other post office investigator.
And the other amendments were that I wrote in that after the interview with Mr. McLaughlin and Mrs. McKelvey, I had no further involvement in the prosecution case of either party, but in fact it brought to my attention that because I made a witness statement, I had in fact had some involvement. So they're just the two amendments that I feel I should make.
So, as has become standard, there are some amendments before questions. Nothing there of any major substance, basically just saying I've now seen something that I said I hadn't seen at the time, and actually I might have had some further involvement that I forgot about, which, to be fair, is understandable. So he's wrote a witness statement afterwards. It's understandable, smaller details like that could be missed out, but it seems he does have involvement in both the McLaughlin and the McKelvey cases, which the post office inspectors spoke about last week as well, so it'll be interesting to get his take on it and see what the extent of his involvement was.
And just for the purpose of the transcript, in relation to the interview tapes of Mrs. McKelvey, that should be paragraph 39 of your witness statement at page 13. You say that I have now seen case papers relating to this case, but not the interview tape transcripts. So that's a correction in relation to that you have seen those transcripts.
So, in fact, if you just delete the but not the, and put in there and, yes. I've seen the case papers related to the case and the interview tape transcripts.
Thank you.
That would satisfy that one.
And then just in relation to both case studies, that you did provide a witness statement in both cases, but those were limited to describing the fact of both the audit and the interview. Is that correct?
Yes, yes.
Thank you. So, having made those corrections, are the contents of that witness statement true to the best of your knowledge and belief?
They are, yes.
And for the purposes of the transcript, the URN is WITN 10410100. As you know, my name's Megan Miller, and I will be asking you questions on behalf of the inquiry. And I think you'd agree that you've had a long and varied career working for the Post Office.
Yes.
But for the purposes of your evidence today, I'll just be focusing on the conduct of investigations, and particularly in Northern Ireland.
Okay, yep.
So could we start, please, with the roles you held while working for the Post Office? And is it correct that your career with the Post Office spanned from 1976 to January 2003?
It does, yes. Albeit the very first part, I wasn't a direct employee of the Post Office. I was a sub-postmaster, so I was an agent of the Post Office, but was working for the Post Office at that time, yeah.
So he should know how it was for sub-postmasters at least then, maybe not the impact of the Horizon system, but certainly how they operate and how things happen and the kind of issues that they could be facing on a day-to-day basis.
Thank you. And so when you started working for as a sub-postmaster, that was in 1976, is that
Yes.
correct? And you then held a number of roles in Post Office branches until 1987 when you became an audit manager.
Yes.
And you were promoted to district audit manager in 1990 before you became a security and investigation manager in 1993, is that right?
Yes.
And in that role, were you based in Leeds?
Sorry,
Were you based in Leeds when you became a security and investigation manager?
well, I became security investigation manager following a business reorganisation. The area I was working in, the district, Newcastle, was merged with Leeds, and my job as an audit manager disappeared, but I went with my finance manager into security investigation. Initially, I was doing the physical security, procedural security, and the design of security equipment for sub-post offices before I was moved on to the investigation side.
And so then in 1996, is it right that you were asked if you'd be interested in becoming an investigation manager?
Yes.
And so just in terms of the titles of those roles, up to that point you'd been a security and investigation manager. How did this role then, the new one in 1996, differ from that?
It differed in so much as the first part of the job was security, physical security, procedural security, and then the second part was purely looking at the investigative side of crime or potential crime against the Post Office.
So he's had a long and varied career with the Post Office, as we've seen with many others. He seems quite upbeat and quite confident, so we shall see how this goes in terms of his testimony, particularly with regards to the McKelvey and McLaughlin cases.